Footsteps echoed through the marble foyer far too early for a man who wasn't supposed to return until Friday. Dante Russo had built an empire on absolute unpredictability, yet nothing could have prepared him for what waited behind his own front door. His heavy-set, fiercely loyal maid, Beatrice, stepped out from the shadows, her face completely pale, a trembling finger pressed urgently to her lips. "Stay quiet," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the pounding rain outside. What lay beyond that door would shatter his entire world forever. Rain lashed violently against the tinted windows of the Maybach as it cruised down the deserted stretches of Sheridan Road. Dante Russo, a man whose name commanded both profound respect and quiet terror throughout Chicago's sprawling underworld, stared out at the dark waters of Lake Michigan. He was supposed to be in Miami for 3 more days, negotiating a delicate supply route with a Colombian syndicate. But the meeting had concluded early, and a nagging intuition, a primal instinct that had kept him alive through 2 decades of mob warfare, had urged him to board his private jet at Opa-locka Airport and fly straight home to Highland Park. He hadn't called ahead. He rarely did. Dante enjoyed the quiet satisfaction of returning to his fortress, a sprawling multi-million-dollar estate shielded by wrought-iron gates and ancient oak trees. More importantly, he wanted to surprise Camilla. His beautiful, sophisticated fiancée was the only soft spot in his otherwise hardened, brutal life. She had brought a semblance of peace to the chaotic, violent world he inhabited. Or so he believed. The heavy iron gates parted seamlessly as his driver bypassed the main intercom using the encrypted remote access. The tires crunched softly against the wet gravel of the circular driveway. The massive stone facade of the estate loomed in the darkness. Strangely, the house was entirely devoid of exterior illumination. The perimeter floodlights, which were programmed to activate at dusk, were dead. Dante felt a sudden icy prickle at the base of his neck. He instructed his driver to remain in the vehicle with the engine running, sliding a cold, suppressed compact pistol from his shoulder holster into his overcoat pocket. He bypassed the main entrance instead, using his thumbprint to unlock the heavy oak side door that led directly into the mudroom and the servant quarters. The interior was pitch black silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of the storm outside. He stepped inside his leather shoes, making no sound on the imported Italian tile. As he reached out to press the wall switch, a thick, warm hand suddenly clamped shut over his wrist. Dante reacted with lethal speed, pivoting and raising his weapon, but he stopped just inches from the intruder's face. It was Beatrice Moore. Beatrice was the estate's head maid, a woman who had served the Russo family for over 15 years. She was a deeply overweight, heavy-set woman in her late 40s, carrying a significant amount of extra bulk around her waist and hips. Her wide, round face was usually flushed red from the exertion of managing the massive property, and she typically moved with a slow, heavy, rolling gait. However, tonight there was no red flush of exhaustion on her cheeks. She was deathly pale. Her large chest heaved as she struggled to control her rapid breathing, her dark eyes wide with unadulterated terror. Before Dante could utter a single syllable of reprimand, Beatrice pressed a thick, trembling finger to her own lips. "Stay quiet." She breathed, her voice a fragile, raspy whisper. She didn't let go of his wrist. Despite her soft, fleshy appearance, her grip possessed a desperate, vice-like strength. She forcefully pulled him away from the hallway, leading to the grand foyer, dragging his tall frame toward the narrow, unlit utility closet used for storing heavy cleaning equipment. Once inside the cramped, pine-scented darkness, Dante finally pulled his arm free. His voice, a low, dangerous rumble. "Beatrice, what the hell is going on? Why is the house dark? Where is Camilla?" Tears instantly welled in the corners of Beatrice's eyes, spilling over her full cheeks. "Mr. Russo," she stammered, swallowing hard, her double chin trembling with the effort to keep her voice down. "You weren't supposed to be here. Thank God you came through the side door. If you had walked through the front, they would have killed you on the spot." Dante's blood ran cold, the temperature in the small closet seemingly dropping 10 degrees. "Who is they?" Beatrice took a shuddering breath, her large frame shaking. "Men. 6 of them. They arrived an hour ago. Heavily armed, wearing tactical gear. They disabled the perimeter cameras and cut the main power lines. They are sitting in the formal living room, right now, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Dante demanded, his mind racing through a mental list of rival bosses and disgruntled capos. "Waiting for tomorrow morning." Beatrice whispered, her eyes pleading with him to understand the gravity of the situation. "They expected you on the early flight tomorrow. They were going to ambush you in the driveway." Dante tightened his grip on his weapon, a cold, calculated fury replacing his initial shock. If a hit squad had bypassed his multi-million-dollar security system without triggering a single silent alarm, it meant only one thing. It was an inside job. Someone with top-tier clearance had opened the gates for them. "Where is Camilla?" Dante asked, again, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "Did they hurt her? Is she a hostage?" Beatrice looked down at the floor, her heavy shoulders slumping forward. She squeezed her eyes shut, and when she opened them, they were filled with profound sorrow. She had always loved Dante, in a strictly maternal, protective way. She had seen him bleed, she had cleaned up his messes, and she had silently observed every intimate detail of his life. "She isn't a hostage, Mr. Russo," Beatrice said softly, the devastating truth hanging heavy in the stagnant air of the closet. She poured them drinks. She is sitting on the leather sofa right now, laughing with the man who ordered the hit. The silence that followed Beatrice's revelation was deafening. Dante felt as though the floor beneath his expensive shoes had suddenly dissolved into a bottomless chasm. Camilla. His beautiful, innocent Camilla, the woman who claimed to despise the violence of his world, was sitting in his living room, entertaining an execution squad. "You are absolutely certain of this?" "Beatrice," Dante asked, his voice tighter than a coiled spring. He needed to be sure before he unleashed the violence simmering just beneath his skin. Beatrice nodded vigorously, her multiple chins wobbling with the movement. "I was in the butler's pantry, polishing the silver when the power cut. I hid behind the dumbwaiter. I heard the front door open. I saw them walk in with the flashlights. I saw Miss Camilla greet them." She paused, wiping a bead of sweat from her forehead with a plump hand. "Mr. Russo." She kissed him. "Kissed who?" Dante snarled, the image burning like acid in his mind. "Leo." Beatrice whispered the name, dropping like a lead weight between them. Leo Giordano, Dante's underboss, his childhood friend from the blood-soaked streets of the West Side, the man who had stood by his side during the cartel wars, the man who was supposed to be his best man at the upcoming wedding. The betrayal was so deep, so profoundly absolute, that it temporarily paralyzed Dante's thought process. His fiancée and his right-hand man. It was the oldest, most cliché story in the Mafia underworld, yet the reality of it felt uniquely agonizing. "They brought someone else, too." Beatrice continued, her breath hitching. Despite her considerable weight, she shifted silently in the cramped space, proving how well she knew every creaking floorboard of the old house. "A man with a heavy accent. Mexican, I think. They called him Hector. They brought paperwork, stacks of it." Dante's tactical mind immediately snapped back into focus, overriding his broken heart. Hector El Mudo Garza, a vicious cartel lieutenant, looking to expand into Chicago's real estate laundering operations. Leo wasn't just taking Dante's life and his woman. He was selling the entire Russo syndicate to the highest bidder. "Show me," Dante commanded, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. Beatrice didn't hesitate. She squeezed past him, her large body pressing against the wall as she reached for a hidden latch behind the mop buckets. The Russo estate was built in the 1920s by a prominent bootlegger, and it was riddled with concealed servant corridors and Prohibition-era smuggling tunnels. Beatrice knew them better than anyone. The wall panel clicked softly and swung outward, revealing a narrow, dust-filled passageway. "Follow me. Step exactly where I step," the heavy-set maid instructed, moving with a surprising fluid grace that utterly defied her physical size. They moved like ghosts through the walls of the mansion. The air in the passage was stale and smelled of dry rot and old brick. Dante followed Beatrice's broad back, deeply impressed by her composure. Most civilians would have fled into the woods or frozen in terror, but Beatrice, this quiet, overweight woman who spent her days meticulously ironing his shirts and baking pastries, was navigating a deadly tactical scenario with the icy calm of a seasoned soldier. They crept up a narrow incline until they reached a small iron grate hidden behind the grand tapestry in the formal living room. Through the ornate metalwork, a dim, flickering light spilled into the darkness. Someone had lit the massive stone fireplace. Dante leaned forward, pressing his eye to the grate. The scene below was exactly as Beatrice had described, though seeing it with his own eyes felt like a physical blow to the chest. 6 men in dark tactical gear stood at various points around the opulent room, assault rifles slung casually over their shoulders. In the center, sitting on the custom-made Italian leather sofa, was Camilla. She looked breathtaking in a silk emerald slip dress, her long blonde hair cascading over her shoulders. She was holding a crystal tumbler of Dante's expensive scotch, laughing softly. Beside her sat Leo Giordano. He had one arm casually draped around Camilla's bare shoulders, his fingers lazily tracing her collarbone. Across from them, sitting in Dante's favorite armchair, was Hector Garza, flanked by 2 heavily tattooed guards. A massive stack of legal documents rested on the mahogany coffee table between them. "Once Dante touches down at O'Hare tomorrow morning, my men will intercept his motorcade on the private access road," Leo was saying, his voice carrying clearly up to the grate. "It will be quick. A tragic, coordinated ambush by an unnamed rival faction. I will step in as the grieving underboss, take control of the family, and immediately sign the Port Authority contracts over to your cartel, Hector." Hector leaned forward, the firelight catching the gold chains around his thick neck. "And the loyalty of his capos will they accept you so easily?" Camilla let out a melodic, cruel little laugh that made Dante's stomach turn. "Dante rules through fear and paranoia," she said, taking a sip of her drink. "Leo is the one they actually like, the one who pays their gambling debts. Once Dante is out of the picture, they will fall in line before the blood is even dry." Up in the dark passage, Dante felt Beatrice's thick hand gently touch his shoulder in a silent gesture of comfort. He looked at her. Her round face was etched with deep empathy. She knew exactly how much those words hurt. Dante reached into his pocket and pulled out his encrypted satellite phone. He needed to call his loyalists, the men who truly answered only to him. But as he looked at the screen, there was no signal. "They have signal jammers," Beatrice whispered, noticing his frustration. "I tried to use the landline in the kitchen, but they cut the physical lines too. We are completely cut off." Dante gritted his teeth. 6 heavily armed mercenaries, a cartel boss, and a treacherous underboss. And he only had a 15-round magazine in his compact pistol. "I have a plan. Mr. Russo," Beatrice breathed, reaching into the deep pocket of her apron. She pulled out a heavy cast-iron skeleton key. "Before I found you, I slipped into the basement mechanical room. I bypassed the main breaker and wired the backup generator directly to the exterior security floodlights. I set it on a 15-minute mechanical timer." Dante stared at the plus-sized Maid in absolute astonishment. "You rigged the lights. When they turn on, it will blind them for at least 10 seconds, and they will think the police have arrived," Beatrice explained, her dark eyes flashing with fierce determination. "But we have a bigger problem. The safe room upstairs. Camilla changed the biometric lock combination yesterday. She locked your primary weapon vault." The situation had just gone from desperate to a veritable suicide mission. Time was the only currency that mattered now, and Dante Russo was dangerously low on it. Standing in the suffocating darkness of the secret corridor, he rapidly calculated his odds. 6 mercenaries with tactical rifles, a cartel enforcer, and an underboss against 1 man with a 15-round compact pistol. The math was essentially a death sentence. Camilla's betrayal regarding the biometric weapon vault had effectively neutralized his primary defense strategy. Beatrice shifted her considerable weight to the wooden floorboards, groaning softly beneath her heavy-set frame. She wiped her sweating brow with the back of her thick forearm. "Mr. Russo," she whispered, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. "Miss Camilla locked the modern vault, yes, but she doesn't know about the old cellar. She never goes down there because of the dampness. She hates the smell of the old stone." Dante's brow furrowed in the pitch black. "The wine cellar, I only keep vintage Bordeaux and Tuscan reds down there. There are no weapons." A faint, strained smile touched the maid's plump lips. "You know how to run a syndicate, sir, but you don't know this house like I do. Your grandfather, Don Vincenzo, he didn't trust electronic safes. He used to tell me, 'Beatrice, steel and wires will always betray you, but stone keeps its secrets.' Follow me. We only have 7 minutes before the floodlight timer triggers." She turned her large hips, brushing against the narrow walls of the hidden passageway, and began a slow, methodical descent down a steep set of wooden utility stairs. Dante followed closely, marveling at the woman's resilience. Despite her profound obesity and the obvious physical toll the rapid movement was taking on her heart and lungs, Beatrice moved with an iron-willed determination. She navigated the treacherous, unlit steps entirely by memory, her thick fingers tracing the rough brickwork for guidance. They emerged behind a false panel in the subterranean wine cellar. The air here was incredibly frigid, thick with the scent of aged oak dust and fermented grapes. Rows upon rows of priceless wine bottles rested in wrought-iron racks stretching across the cavernous room. Beatrice waddled urgently toward the far corner, her heavy breath pluming in the cold air. She stopped in front of a massive ceiling-height wooden cask from the Prohibition era, one that Dante had always assumed was simply a decorative antique left over from his grandfather's bootlegging days. "Help me push the iron band," Beatrice instructed, pressing her meaty palms against the rusted metal hoop encircling the barrel's base. "Push it upward." Dante holstered his pistol and threw his weight against the iron ring alongside Beatrice. With a harsh metallic grinding noise, the band slid upward. The front of the massive oak barrel swung open like a vault door. Inside, resting on pristine black velvet, was a breathtaking arsenal. Don Vincenzo had clearly updated his stash before he passed away. There were 2 customized Benelli M4 tactical shotguns, a suppressed Heckler, and Koch MP5 submachine gun, several heavy-duty fragmentation grenades, and stacks of loaded magazines. It was enough firepower to outfit a small army. Dante felt a grim, predatory smile stretch across his face. He reached in, grabbing the MP5 and slapping a fresh magazine into the well. He slung one of the tactical shotguns over his broad shoulder and stuffed extra magazines into his overcoat pockets. The balance of power had just shifted entirely. "You are a lifesaver," Beatrice Dante said, quietly, his voice vibrating with lethal intent. The heavy-set woman grabbed a heavy iron fireplace poker from a nearby rack, gripping it tightly in her plump hands. "They came into my home with muddy boots and loaded guns, Mr. Russo. Nobody disrespects this house. What is the plan?" "When those exterior lights turn on, they are going to go blind," Dante explained, his mind operating with cold, tactical precision. "The tactical gear they are wearing includes night vision goggles. When a massive surge of halogen light hits those lenses, it will burn their retinas. That is my window. You stay down here and lock the cellar door from the inside." "No," Beatrice said firmly, her double chin setting stubbornly. "I know the acoustic zones of this house. If I go to the second-floor laundry chute, I can drop heavy detergent barrels down the shaft. It will sound exactly like men breaking through the skylights. It will divide their attention." Dante looked at the overweight, fiercely loyal woman, feeling a surge of profound respect. She was putting her life on the line for him, displaying more courage and loyalty than his own fiancé and his closest friend combined. He nodded once. "Do it. But stay out of sight. If anyone comes up those stairs, you hide." They separated, Dante moving swiftly up the main servant staircase toward the kitchen. He positioned himself behind the massive marble island, aiming the suppressed submachine gun toward the swinging doors that led to the formal dining room and the adjacent living area. Above him, a heavy antique grandfather clock began to chime. Midnight? Suddenly, the timer Beatrice had rigged in the basement engaged. Outside, 40 massive halogen floodlights, originally designed to illuminate the sprawling 10-acre estate, roared to life simultaneously. Because the power had been cut to the interior, the hit squad's eyes had fully adjusted to the dark. 2 of the mercenaries were wearing advanced night vision optics. The blinding white-hot light blasted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room, flooding the space with the intensity of a dying sun. Agonized screams erupted from the living room. "Police! It's a raid. We're compromised." One of the mercenaries roared, tearing the burning goggles from his face and stumbling blindly over the mahogany coffee table. Panic consumed the room. Leo shouted confused orders, while Hector Garza cursed violently in Spanish. Camilla let out a piercing shriek, dropping her crystal tumbler. It shattered against the stone hearth, the expensive scotch pooling on the rug. Dante didn't hesitate. He kicked open the swinging kitchen doors and stepped into the blinding light like a reaper emerging from the shadows. Gunpowder smoke hung thick and acrid in the humid air of the grand foyer, mixing with the metallic tang of fresh blood. Dante's initial assault had been terrifyingly precise. In the chaos of the blinding floodlights, he had eliminated the 2 mercenaries closest to the entryway, with 2 controlled, suppressed bursts from his MP5. They dropped to the expensive Persian rug before they even realized they were under attack. The remaining 4 cartel guards, highly trained but completely disoriented, returned fire blindly. Bullets tore through the drywall, shattering antique vases and ripping expensive oil paintings to shreds. Dante dove behind a massive marble Corinthian column, fragments of stone peppering his designer coat as a hail of assault rifle fire chewed into his cover. "Hold your fire! Hold your fire!" Leo Giordano bellowed, his voice cracking with panic. He was huddled behind the custom leather sofa, shielding his eyes from the glaring halogen light pouring through the windows. It's not the cops. The perimeter alarms never tripped Hector Garza, a seasoned veteran of the brutal Juarez cartel wars, quickly deduced the reality of their situation. He grabbed Camilla by her blonde hair, dragging her forcefully down behind the heavy oak coffee table. She screamed, her elegant emerald dress tearing against the broken glass on the floor. "It's him!" Hector snarled, pressing a heavy revolver against Camilla's cheek. "Your dead man is home early, Leo, and he has automatic weapons." Dante remained perfectly still, behind the marble column, checking his magazine. He needed to fracture their fragile alliance to turn their paranoia against them. The acoustics of the grand foyer allowed voices to bounce and echo, making it nearly impossible to pinpoint a speaker's exact location. Leo Dante called out, his deep voice rolling through the bullet-torn room like distant thunder. It was remarkably calm, utterly devoid of the manic panic infecting the men trapped in the living room. I must admit, I expected better. A cartel hit squad. You couldn't even find local boys willing to pull the trigger on me. Leo swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he gripped his pistol. Dante, listen to me. This isn't personal. It's strictly business. You're holding the syndicate back. The old ways are dead. And stealing my fiancé, Dante's voice echoed from a different angle as he silently shifted to the adjacent dining room archway. Was that business too, or just a pathetic attempt to finally feel like a real man? Camilla began to sob openly, her carefully constructed facade of sophisticated cruelty crumbling under the terrifying reality of Dante's presence. Dante, please. They forced me. Leo threatened to kill my sister if I didn't help him. Dante felt a surge of pure disgust. Even now, facing death, she was lying. He had heard her laughing. He had seen her kiss the man who ordered his execution. Hector, Dante called out, completely ignoring Camilla's pathetic pleas. Ask yourself a simple question. A man who betrays his boss of 20 years, a man who sleeps in his best friend's bed. Do you really think he is going to honor a real estate contract with a Mexican cartel? Once he has the throne, silence fell over the living room, save for the heavy, terrified breathing of the remaining guards. Dante's psychological venom was working. Shut up, Leo screamed, aiming his gun toward the dining room. He's trying to get inside your head. Hector, kill him! Suddenly, a horrific, booming crash echoed from the second floor. It sounded exactly like a team of heavily armored men breaching the skylights. Another loud crash followed, then another heavy thuds that shook the ceiling plaster. Beatrice, the heavy-set maid, was upstairs shoving full 50-pound barrels of industrial laundry detergent down the long wooden laundry chutes, just as she had promised. To the paranoid, adrenaline-fueled mercenaries below, it sounded exactly like a SWAT team fast roping into the upper levels. They're on the roof. We're surrounded. One of the cartel guards panicked, breaking from his cover behind the fireplace and sprinting toward the front door. It was a fatal mistake. Dante stepped out from the archway and fired a single 3-round burst. The guard collapsed instantly, sliding across the polished hardwood floor. 3 down. 3 to go. The distraction shattered Hector's remaining patience. Believing they were being overrun by either police or Dante's loyalist capos, the cartel lieutenant made a split-second decision. Survival trumped the business deal. Hector violently shoved Camilla away, raising his heavy revolver and pointing it directly at Leo's chest. You told me this house was empty, you miserable rat, Hector. Wait, no. Leo pleaded, raising his hands. The remaining cartel guards, seeing their boss turn on the Chicago underboss, shifted their weapons toward Leo. The alliance had completely self-destructed. Dante slung the MP5 onto his back and unholstered the Benelli M4 tactical shotgun. He pumped a heavy slug into the chamber, the intimidating clack-clack sound freezing everyone in the living room. Dante stepped fully into the blinding halogen light, a terrifying silhouette of vengeance against the glaring white backdrop. He looked at the cowering men, his eyes completely devoid of mercy. Welcome to my home, Dante said softly. Before anyone could pull a trigger, Beatrice's heavy footsteps thundered on the staircase behind him. She hadn't stayed hidden. The massive woman appeared at the top of the landing, holding the heavy iron fireplace poker like a broadsword, her face red with exertion and pure, unadulterated fury. She looked down at the bleeding, shattered ruins of her pristine foyer, and then locked eyes with the terrified Camilla. "You ruined my clean floors," Beatrice bellowed, her voice echoing with more authority than any mob boss. Dante raised the shotgun. The true war for Chicago's underworld was about to begin right in his own living room. Gunfire erupted with deafening ferocity the moment Dante racked the tactical shotgun. Hector Garza, operating purely on cartel survival instincts, did not aim for the man holding the Benelli M4. Instead, the Mexican enforcer turned his heavy revolver directly onto Leo Giordano, convinced the underboss had orchestrated this entire ambush to eliminate him and seize the laundering contracts without paying the cartel's percentage. Hector's weapon barked twice, sending massive .44 Magnum hollow point rounds tearing into Leo's shoulder and abdomen. Blood sprayed across the pristine white cushions of the custom Italian leather sofa. Leo screamed, dropping his own Sig Sauer pistol as the sheer kinetic impact of the heavy rounds threw him backward over the mahogany coffee table. He crashed into the shattered remains of Dante's crystal Scotch tumblers, writhing in agonizing pain as dark red blood rapidly pooled beneath his tailored Armani suit jacket. Simultaneously, the two remaining cartel guards raised their assault rifles toward Dante. They were fast, heavily tattooed veterans of the brutal border conflicts, but they were deeply disoriented by the blinding halogen floodlights pouring through the shattered windows. Dante, intimately familiar with every angle and shadow of his own foyer, moved with predatory grace. He sidestepped behind a shattered Corinthian column and fired the shotgun. The heavy buckshot slammed into the chest of the closest guard, lifting him completely off his feet and throwing him backward into the massive Steinway grand piano. The instrument let out a horrific, discordant crash of breaking strings and splintering wood as the dead man's weight collapsed onto the keys. Panic completely overtook the final cartel guard. Seeing his comrades slaughtered and his boss firing upon their supposed ally, the mercenary scrambled backward toward the grand staircase, desperately seeking the higher ground. He aimed his rifle upward, preparing to lay down suppressing fire on the second-floor landing. He never even saw Beatrice coming. The heavy-set Maid, fueled by decades of fierce protective loyalty to the Russo family, stood at the top of the stairs like a vengeful guardian. Her thick, muscular arms, built from years of scrubbing stone floors and hauling heavy linens, gripped the solid iron fireplace poker tightly. As the cartel guard rushed up the carpeted steps, turning his head to check his 6 o'clock, Beatrice swung the heavy iron rod downward with all of her considerable body weight behind it. The sickening crunch of shattering bone echoed clearly over the ringing in Dante's ears. The heavy iron poker struck the mercenary squarely across his collarbone and jaw. The immense force generated by Beatrice's heavy frame sent the man tumbling backward down the sweeping staircase in a chaotic tangle of limbs and tactical gear. He landed in a motionless heap at the bottom of the marble steps, his neck bent at a deeply unnatural angle. Beatrice stood at the top of the landing, her large, round face flushed a deep crimson, her massive chest heaving violently. She wiped a stray lock of graying hair from her sweaty forehead, her dark eyes glaring down at the carnage. She looked entirely out of place in her simple, flour-dusted uniform, a deeply overweight domestic worker, standing triumphant amidst a blood-soaked mob battlefield. Yet to Dante she looked like an absolute saint. Down in the living room, Hector Garza realized he was the last man standing. His cartel guards were dead. Leo was bleeding out on the floor, gasping for breath. The blinding exterior lights continued to blaze, casting long, nightmarish shadows across the ruined luxury of the estate. Hector frantically looked around for an escape route, his eyes settling on the trembling figure of Camilla, who was huddled behind an overturned armchair, covering her ears and sobbing hysterically. Hector lunged toward the beautiful blonde fiancée, his massive hand tangling violently in her hair. He hauled her roughly to her feet, dragging her in front of his body as a human shield. He pressed the smoking barrel of his revolver hard against her temple. "Drop the shotgun, Russo!" Hector roared, backing slowly toward the shattered floor-to-ceiling windows leading to the rear terrace. The heavy rain whipped through the broken glass, soaking his clothes. "Drop the weapon, or I paint your beautiful bride's brains all over this expensive wallpaper. I will put a hole straight through her skull." Camilla wept pathetically, her flawless makeup running down her pale cheeks in dark, muddy streaks. The elegant emerald silk dress she wore was torn and stained with Leo's blood. "Dante, please," she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure terror. "Do what he says. Please, he's going to kill me. Save me." Dante stepped out from behind the marble column, the Benelli M4 held firmly at his shoulder. His face was an unreadable mask of cold, calculating granite. He stared directly at Camilla, looking past the gun pressed to her head, looking deep into the eyes of the woman he had intended to marry in 3 weeks. He saw the sheer, desperate selfishness radiating from her. She had been perfectly willing to watch him die less than 10 minutes ago, laughing over scotch with his murderers. Hector Dante said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low, calm octave that sent shivers down Beatrice's spine up on the balcony. "You are a businessman from Nuevo Laredo. I am a businessman from Chicago. We understand the currency of leverage." Hector tightened his grip on Camilla's hair, causing her to whimper in agony. "I have the only leverage that matters in this room. Russo, I have your woman." Dante let out a dark, humorless chuckle that chilled the blood in Camilla's veins. He didn't lower the shotgun a single inch. "You are holding a woman who just sold out her fiancé of 3 years to the highest bidder," Dante replied, his eyes locking onto the cartel boss. "You are holding a traitor. In my world, Hector traitors have 0 market value. She isn't leverage, she is garbage." Camilla's eyes widened in absolute shock and horror. The realization that her beauty and her tears had completely lost their power over Dante hit her harder than a physical blow. "You think I care if you shoot her?" Dante continued, taking a slow, deliberate step forward, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. "In fact, Hector, if you pull that trigger, you are doing me a favor. You are saving me the trouble of doing it myself, and you are saving me the legal fees of a messy breakup. So go ahead. Shoot her." Silence descended upon the ruined living room, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain outside, and the wet, gargling breaths of Leo Giordano bleeding out on the expensive Persian rug. Hector Garza stared at Dante Russo, completely stunned. The cartel boss had built his entire career on exploiting the emotional weaknesses of his enemies. He expected Dante to drop to his knees to beg for the life of his stunningly beautiful fiancée. Instead, he was staring into the eyes of a predator who had completely detached himself from all human sentiment. Hector's grip on Camilla's hair slowly loosened. He realized with terrifying clarity that he was holding a worthless shield. The psychological warfare had broken his focus. In that microscopic fraction of a second, as Hector's eyes darted towards the rear exit to gauge his escape, Dante squeezed the trigger. The suppressed MP5 submachine gun, which Dante had seamlessly drawn with his left hand while keeping the shotgun leveled with his right, spat 3 muffled rounds. The bullets struck Hector Garza squarely in the center of his forehead, forming a tight, bloody triangle. The cartel lieutenant's eyes rolled back into his skull, and his massive body collapsed backward into the pouring rain on the terrace, dead before he hit the wet stone. Camilla screamed, falling to her knees amidst the broken glass and blood. She wrapped her arms around herself, violently trembling as the cold wind whipped through the destroyed living room. Dante slowly lowered his weapons. He engaged the safety on the shotgun and set it down on a relatively intact side table. He walked over to the mahogany coffee table, his shoes crunching on the shattered crystal. He looked down at Leo. His underboss, his oldest friend from the brutal streets of the West Side, was dying. The .44 Magnum rounds had destroyed his liver and lungs. Leo coughed blood, bubbling past his lips, his hands weakly clutching his ruined abdomen. He looked up at Dante, his eyes filled with a potent mixture of excruciating pain and profound regret. Dante. Leo choked out his voice, barely a wet whisper. I'm sorry. The money, the power, it blinded me. I was a fool. Dante knelt beside the dying man, his face devoid of any sorrow. He had mourned the loss of his friend the moment Beatrice whispered the truth in the dark closet. The man bleeding out on the floor was just a stranger wearing a familiar face. You broke the oath, Leo Dante said quietly, his voice carrying the heavy ancient authority of the Cosa Nostra. You brought armed men into my sanctuary. You brought a cartel rat into my home. But the worst sin you made, Beatrice cry, that I cannot forgive. Leo let out a wet, rattling breath, his eyes losing focus as the darkness crept in. He tried to speak again, to beg for absolution, but his lungs filled with blood and his head lolled to the side. The ambitious underboss of the Chicago syndicate was dead. Dante stood up slowly, turning his attention to the woman cowering on the floor. Camilla slowly raised her head. Seeing that the immediate danger had passed, her survival instincts kicked into overdrive. She immediately attempted to weaponize her beauty, forcing fresh tears to well up in her striking blue eyes. Dante, my love. Camilla sobbed, crawling toward him across the ruined floor, ignoring the broken glass, cutting into her bare knees. She reached out with trembling, blood-stained hands, desperately trying to grab the hem of his tailored overcoat. You saved me. Thank God you came home early. Leo forced me, Dante. He told me he would kill my family if I didn't pretend to go along with his plan. You have to believe me. I love you. Before Dante could respond, heavy, thudding footsteps descended the grand staircase. Beatrice waddled into the living room, her large frame casting a long shadow. She was carrying a thick, leather-bound medical file she had retrieved from Camilla's private vanity upstairs during the chaos. The heavy-set maid's face was twisted in a scowl of pure disgust. Do not let her touch you, Mr. Russo. Beatrice spat her voice, ringing with maternal authority. She threw the heavy medical folder directly at Camilla's feet. It slapped loudly against the wet floorboards, bursting open to reveal sonogram photos and clinic reports. Dante looked down at the scattered papers, his sharp eyes quickly scanning the medical letterhead from a private, highly discreet clinic on the Gold Coast. She didn't just sleep with Leo. Beatrice said, her double chin trembling with righteous anger, her thick arms crossing firmly over her large chest. While I was cleaning her bathroom yesterday, I found these hidden behind the towels. She is 9 weeks pregnant, Mr. Russo. And considering you were in Europe, handling the Sicilian ports for 3 months, that child certainly does not belong to you. The final devastating twist hit Dante with the force of a freight train. The puzzle pieces suddenly snapped together with sickening clarity. Leo and Camilla hadn't just plotted to take over the syndicate. They had plotted to murder Dante before the wedding so that Dante would never discover the child wasn't his. They were going to build their treacherous stolen empire on Dante's grave, raising their bastard child with his money. Camilla froze, staring in absolute horror at the medical files scattered around her knees. The lie was dead. There was no spinning this, no manipulating her way out. She looked up at Dante, all the fake love evaporating from her face, replaced by sheer, naked panic. Dante? Wait. She stammered, scrambling backward like a cornered rat. Dante looked at her with an expression of profound emptiness. She wasn't a mob boss. She wasn't a cartel soldier. She was just a greedy, treacherous parasite. Killing her would violate his deepest personal codes, but letting her walk away unpunished was out of the question. Dante pulled his encrypted satellite phone from his pocket, the signal jammers having been destroyed when Beatrice smashed the first cartel guard on the stairs. He dialed a highly secure number. Victor Dante said calmly into the receiver, speaking to his most trusted cleaner and fixer. "Bring the heavy crews to the Highland Park estate. We have significant trash to dispose of." Dante paused, looking coldly down at his former fiancée. "And Victor, bring a secure transport van. Miss Camilla will be relocating permanently to the old meatpacking warehouse on the south side. Leave her there with nothing but the torn dress on her back. Let her see how long her beauty lasts in the gutters she tried to rule." Camilla shrieked a horrifying guttural sound of pure despair as she realized her luxurious life of wealth and power was completely violently over. Dante turned his back on her, walking over to the heavy-set woman who had saved his life, his empire, and his honor. He placed a gentle, deeply respectful hand on Beatrice's broad shoulder. "Come, Beatrice," the Mafia boss said, softly leading the fiercely loyal maid toward the kitchen, away from the blood and the screaming. "Let's make some tea. We have a lot of cleaning up to do tomorrow." Dawn crept over the turbulent, icy waters of Lake Michigan, casting a cold, slate-gray pallor over the shattered remains of the Highland Park estate. The violent storm had finally broken, leaving behind a chilling, heavy silence that felt far more oppressive than the deafening gunfire from the night before. Inside the kitchen, the harsh scent of industrial bleach completely masked the metallic copper tang of spilled blood. Victor's cleanup crew, a team of 6 silent, highly efficient professionals, moved through the grand foyer like phantoms. They scrubbed the pristine Italian tile, repaired the bullet-riddled drywall, and quietly zipped the lifeless bodies of Hector Garza, Leo Giordano, and the cartel mercenaries into heavy black transport bags. Dante Russo sat at the massive marble island in the kitchen, his tailored overcoat draped casually over the back of a leather bar stool. Across from him sat Beatrice. The heavily overweight maid looked completely exhausted, her large, round face sagging with the profound emotional and physical toll of the brutal night. Her thick, meaty fingers were wrapped tightly around a delicate porcelain teacup, the steam curling upward to warm her flushed double chin. Despite her immense size and the flour stains still clinging to her uniform, Dante looked at her with a level of absolute reverence he usually reserved only for the highest-ranking Mafia dons. "They are almost finished in the living room, Mr. Russo," Beatrice murmured, her raspy voice barely above a whisper. She took a slow sip of her chamomile tea, her heavy chest rising and falling in a rhythmic, calming cadence. "The contractor will arrive at noon to replace the floor-to-ceiling windows. I told him it was a severe bird strike." Dante offered a faint, grim smile. "You think of everything, Beatrice. You always have." He reached into his pocket and placed his encrypted phone on the marble counter. It was time to deal with the logistical nightmare Camilla had left behind. Dante dialed a direct, highly secure line to Kroll Corporate Investigations, a real internationally renowned private intelligence and corporate risk firm based out of New York. He didn't trust the syndicate's internal accountants right now. He needed absolute impenetrable outside expertise. "This is Richard," a crisp professional voice answered on the second ring. "Richard, it is Dante Russo." Dante spoke quietly, his eyes never leaving Beatrice's steady gaze. "I have a situation that requires your firm's immediate discretion. I need you to run a full deep dive forensic audit on my former fiancée, Camilla Davies. I want you to trace every single wire transfer, every hidden shell corporation, and every offshore account she has opened in the last 36 months. Freeze them all. Route the funds directly into my primary holding trust at Northern Trust Bank. Leave her with absolutely zero. Consider it done, Mr. Russo. We will have her financial footprint entirely erased by lunchtime, the private investigator confirmed before severing the connection. Dante hung up the phone, a cold sense of satisfaction washing over his exhausted mind. Camilla had thought she was outsmarting a street-level thug, completely forgetting that Dante operated a billion-dollar empire. He wasn't just going to break her physically by sending her to the slums. He was going to obliterate her entire existence. Miles away, deep in the decaying industrial sector of Chicago's South Side, Camilla was experiencing that brutal reality firsthand. The old meatpacking warehouse was a cavernous, freezing tomb of rusted iron and rotting wood. Camilla huddled in the darkest corner, her arms wrapped tightly around her shivering body. The elegant emerald silk dress, once a symbol of her high society status, was now a filthy, blood-stained rag clinging to her cold skin. There was no heating, no lighting, and no escape. The heavy steel doors had been chained shut from the outside by Victor's men. She wept uncontrollably, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her own arms as she listened to the horrifying sound of rats scurrying across the damp concrete floor. She had gambled everything on her beauty and Leo's ambition, truly believing she could manipulate the Mafia underworld. Now pregnant with a dead traitor's child and stripped of every single dollar she had ever stolen, she realized she was entirely disposable. Dante hadn't even deemed her worthy of a bullet. He had simply discarded her like broken glass. Back at the Highland Park mansion, Dante stood up from the marble island. He walked over to the kitchen sink, washing his hands with methodical precision. He had a meeting with the remaining capos in 2 hours. He was going to toss Leo's bloody underboss ring onto the boardroom table and dare any man in the room to question his authority. The syndicate was about to undergo a ruthless, bloody purge, but before he rebuilt his empire, he needed to honor the woman who had saved it. Dante turned back to Beatrice. The fat, fiercely loyal maid was struggling to stand up, her bad knees popping under the strain of her significant weight. Dante quickly crossed the kitchen gently, taking her thick arm and helping her find her balance. Beatrice listened to me carefully, Dante said, his voice ringing with absolute, unwavering sincerity. You are no longer a maid in this house. You are the head of this estate. You will have a staff of your own to manage the heavy lifting. Furthermore, I am setting up a private trust in your name, holding $5 million. You will never have to worry about your retirement, your medical bills, or your family ever again. Tears instantly welled in Beatrice's dark eyes, spilling over her plump cheeks. She shook her head stubbornly, her multiple chins wobbling. Mr. Russo, I didn't do it for the money. I did it because your grandfather took my family off the streets when I was just a hungry little girl. This family is my family. I protect what is mine. Dante felt a profound tightness in his chest, a rare surge of genuine emotion cracking through his hardened exterior. In the Mafia, men constantly spoke of loyalty, kissing rings and swearing blood oaths, only to stab each other in the back for a slightly larger cut of the profits. Camilla had whispered words of love while plotting his murder. But Beatrice, this quiet, heavy-set woman who spent her life unnoticed in the background, had grabbed an iron poker and charged into a hail of cartel gunfire to protect him. I know you didn't do it for the money, Beatrice too, Dante whispered, pulling the large, overweight woman into a tight, deeply respectful embrace. That is exactly why you are the only person in this entire world who actually deserves it. You are the true heart of this family. As the morning sun finally broke through the heavy clouds illuminating the pristine, blood-free floors of the mansion, Dante Russo realized a fundamental truth. Romance and passion were dangerous, fleeting illusions in his dark world. True love, the kind that actually mattered when the guns were drawn and the lights went out, looked exactly like fiercely, unwavering loyalty. And he had finally found it. True loyalty is the rarest currency in the Mafia underworld, and Dante Russo learned that the hard way. While his beautiful fiancée plotted his brutal demise, it was his heavy-set, fiercely dedicated Maid who risked everything to save his empire. Camilla's greed led her straight into a cold, rat-infested warehouse, stripped of her wealth, and left to rot in the shadows she tried to rule. Beatrice proved that courage and honor do not wear tailored suits or expensive dresses. If you loved this intense story of betrayal and brutal mafia justice, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life drama.